The first time I stepped into the Haven, I thought I'd made a mistake. The bass thumped through my chest like a second heartbeat, and the air smelled of sweat, cheap cologne, and something electric I couldn't name. I was 23, broke, and desperate, clutching a job ad that promised quick cash and no experience, needed just a willingness to smile and pour drinks. I wasn't supposed to be here. Growing up in a small Ohio town, I'd been taught that places like this were dens of sin, where people lost themselves to temptation. My parents, devout and unyielding, had raised me on a steady diet of church sermons and warnings about those kinds of people. But rent was due. My student loans were a noose around my neck, and the diner job I'd been clinging to had just cut my hours. So, when I saw the ad for a bartender at the Haven, a gay bar in the heart of Columbus, I swallowed my pride and walked through the door. The manager, a wiry man named Tony with a rainbow tattoo snaking up his arm, sized me up like I was a stray dog. "You ever worked a bar before, kid?" he asked, chewing gum with a smirk. "No," I admitted, my voice barely audible over the music. "But I'm a quick learner." He laughed, a sharp bark that made me flinch. "You're straight, aren't you? I can smell it on you." Before I could stammer a response, he waved a hand. "Doesn't matter. You're cute enough. And we're short-staffed. Start tonight. Don't screw it up." That first night was a blur of spilled drinks, wrong orders, and men who looked at me like I was a puzzle they wanted to solve. I felt like an imposter, my flannel shirt and scuffed sneakers out of place among the glitter and leather. But the tips were good, better than I'd ever made at the diner, and by the end of the shift, my pockets were heavy with cash. I told myself it was just a job, a means to an end. I'd work, pay my bills, and get out. Then I met Eli. He was a regular, Tony told me, a fixture at the Haven who always sat at the far end of the bar with a whiskey neat and a smile that could stop your heart. Eli was tall, with dark curls that fell into his eyes and a laugh that carried over the music. He had a way of looking at you not through you, but into you, like he could see the parts you didn't even know you were hiding. The first time he spoke to me, I was fumbling with a cocktail shaker, my hand slick with nerves. "You're new," he said, his voice low and warm, like he was sharing a secret. "What's your name?" "Jake," I said, avoiding his gaze. I focused on pouring the drink, but my hands shook, and I spilled gin on the counter. "Easy, Jake," he said, his smile softening. "You're doing fine. This place'll grow on you." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and moved on to the next order. But I felt his eyes on me for the rest of the night, steady and unapologetic. It wasn't predatory, not like some of the other guys who leaned too close or slipped their numbers with their tips. It was something else, something that made my stomach twist in a way I didn't understand. Over the next few weeks, I settled into the rhythm of the Haven. The chaos became familiar, the drag queens who tipped me in glitter, the couples who danced like the world was ending, the quiet moments at closing when the bar felt like a sanctuary. I learned to mix drinks without looking at the recipes, to laugh off the occasional drunk who got too handsy, to ignore the voice in my head that sounded like my father, whispering that I was straying too far from who I was supposed to be. Eli was there most nights, always at his spot, always with that whiskey and that smile. We talked more as I got braver, trading small pieces of ourselves over the bar. He was a graphic designer, he told me, freelancing for ad agencies and dreaming of starting his own studio. He'd grown up in New York. Left home at 18 when his parents didn't take kindly to him coming out. He didn't talk about it much, but there was a weight in his silences. A story he wasn't ready to tell. You ever think about what you want, Jake? He asked one night, leaning forward so his elbows rested on the bar. The crowd had thinned, and it was just us. The jukebox playing something soft and mournful. Want? I laughed, wiping down the counter to avoid his eyes. I just want to pay my bills and not get evicted. That's surviving, he said, his voice gentle but firm. I'm talking about living. What makes your heart race? I didn't have an answer. I'd spent so long trying to be what everyone else wanted: good son, good student, good Christian, that I'd never stopped to ask myself what I wanted. Eli's question lingered, burrowing into me like a splinter I couldn't pull out. The first time he touched me, it was an accident. I was reaching for his empty glass, and his hand brushed mine, warm and deliberate. I froze, my breath catching, and he didn't pull away. His fingers lingered, just for a second, but it was enough to send a jolt through me, like I'd touched a live wire. I yanked my hand back, muttering something about needing to restock, and fled to the storage room. In the dim light, surrounded by crates of beer, I pressed my hands to my face and tried to breathe. What was wrong with me? I wasn't like that. I'd had girlfriends, dated the way I was supposed to, even if it never felt right. But Eli's touch, that fleeting moment, had lit something inside me I didn't know was there. It terrified me. It thrilled me. I avoided him for the next few nights, keeping busy with other customers, pretending I didn't see him watching me. But the haven was small, and Eli was persistent. One night, as I was closing up, he stayed after last call, helping me stack chairs while Tony counted the register. You're avoiding me, he said, not accusing, just stating a fact. I'm not. I lied, my voice too sharp. I focused on the chair in my hands, its chipped paint rough under my fingers. Jake. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something warm and spicy. If I did something to make you uncomfortable, tell me. I'll back off. I wanted to tell him it wasn't him, that it was me confusion, my fear, the way my body seemed to betray everything I'd been taught. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I shook my head and said, You didn't do anything wrong. He smiled, soft and sad, and reached out like he might touch me again. But he didn't. He just said, Okay. I'm here when you're ready to talk. That night, I lay awake in my tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling as the city hummed outside. I thought about Eli's smile, his voice, the way his presence made the world feel bigger, brighter. I thought about my parents, their disapproval a shadow that followed me everywhere. And for the first time, I wondered if I could be someone else, someone who didn't have to hide. The weeks that followed were a tightrope walk between fear and longing. Every night at the Haven, I felt the pull of Eli's presence. Like gravity, I couldn't escape. He didn't push, didn't crowd me, but his quiet patience was its own kind of pressure. I caught myself watching him, how he laughed with the other regulars, how his hands moved when he talked, how his eyes found mine across the bar, steady and sure. I started staying later, volunteering for closing shifts just to have those moments alone with him. We'd talk about nothing and everything: music, movies, the dreams we were too scared to chase. He told me about the first time he kissed a boy, how it felt like coming home and breaking apart all at once. I listened, my heart pounding, wondering what it would be like to feel that free. One night, after a particularly rough shift, some drunk had thrown a glass, and Tony had yelled at me for overpouring. I found myself outside the Haven, sitting on the curb with Eli. The air was cool, the street quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. He handed me a cigarette, even though I didn't smoke, and I took it just to have something to do with my hands. "You okay?" he asked, lighting his own cigarette. The flame cast shadows across his face, making him look older, softer. "I don't know," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know who I'm supposed to be." Eli exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes never leaving mine. "You don't have to know. Not yet. Sometimes you just have to let yourself feel it. Whatever it is." I wanted to ask him what he meant, but then he leaned closer, and my breath caught. His lips were inches from mine, and for a moment, I thought he might kiss me. I wanted him to. I was terrified he would. But he just smiled, that same soft, sad smile, and said, "You'll figure it out, Jake. You're braver than you think." The next day, I called my mom. I hadn't talked to her in months. Not since she'd sent me a Bible verse about temptation after I told her about the job. Her voice was warm but cautious, like she was waiting for me to confess something. I didn't. I just listened to her talk about church, about my dad's new job, about how they prayed for me every night. When I hung up, I felt like I'd been hollowed out, like I was betraying them just by existing in this new world I'd found. At the Haven, things started to shift. The regulars began to feel like family, their stories weaving into mine. There was Maria, a trans woman who told me about her first drag show, her voice thick with pride. There was Sam, a quiet guy who'd lost his partner to cancer and came to the bar just to feel less alone. Their lives were messy, complicated, beautiful, and they made me question everything I'd been taught about right and wrong. Eli was the center of it all, the sun I couldn't stop orbiting. One night, after closing, he convinced me to dance. The jukebox was playing something slow, and the bar was empty except for us. He took my hand, his grip firm but gentle, and pulled me onto the dance floor. I was clumsy, my feet tripping over themselves. But he didn't laugh. He just held me closer, guiding me through the steps, his breath warm against my cheek. "See," he whispered, "you're not so bad at this." I wanted to stay there forever, in that moment, where nothing else mattered but the weight of his hand in mine. But then the song ended, and reality crashed back in. I pulled away, my face burning, and muttered something about needing to lock up. Eli didn't push, but I saw the hurt in his eyes, the way his smile faltered. I hated myself for it, for being too scared to take what I wanted. That night, I dreamed of him, his hands, his voice, the way he made me feel like I could be someone new. When I woke up, my chest ached with something I couldn't name. The breaking point came a week later. It was Pride weekend, and the Haven was packed, a riot of color and noise. I was behind the bar, pouring drinks as fast as I could, when I saw Eli in the crowd, dancing with someone else. The guy was handsome, confident, everything I wasn't. Jealousy hit me like a punch, sharp and unexpected. I didn't have a right to feel it, but I did. When the crowd thinned, Eli came to the bar, His face flushed from dancing. "You having fun back there?" he asked, leaning in close to be heard over the music. "Who was that guy?" I blurted out, immediately regretting it. Eli raised an eyebrow, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Just a friend." "Why? You jealous?" I didn't answer, but my silence said enough. He reached across the bar, his hand brushing mine, and this time I didn't pull away. "Come find me after your shift," he said. "We need to talk." I spent the rest of the night in a haze, my mind racing. When the bar finally closed, I found Eli outside, leaning against the wall, the neon lights painting his face in shades of blue and pink. He didn't say anything, just held out his hand. I took it, and we walked, the city quiet around us. We ended up at a park, sitting on a bench under a streetlight. The air was warm, thick with the scent of summer grass. Eli turned to me, his eyes searching mine. "What are you so afraid of, Jake?" "Everything," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know if I can be this." He reached for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine. "You don't have to be anything you're not ready for. But you can't keep running from yourself." I wanted to argue, to tell him it wasn't that simple. But then he leaned in, and his lips brushed mine. It was soft, tentative, like he was giving me a chance to pull away. I didn't. I kissed him back, and for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That kiss changed everything. It was like a door swinging open, letting in light I hadn't known I needed. But with the light came shadows, doubts, fears, the weight of a life I'd been taught to reject. I spent the next few days in a daze, replaying that moment in the park, the warmth of Eli's lips, the way his hand felt in mine. I wanted more, but I was terrified of what it meant. At the Haven, I couldn't avoid him. He was there, as always, his presence a constant reminder of the line I'd crossed. We didn't talk about the kiss. Not at first. We just fell back into our routine at the bar, me pouring drinks, our conversations dancing around the truth. But every glance, every accidental touch, felt charged, like we were teetering on the edge of something bigger. My parents called again, their voices sharper this time. They'd heard from a cousin that I was working at some kind of club, and they wanted answers. I lied, told them it was just a bar, nothing special. But their questions lingered, gnawing at me. What would they say if they knew? Would they still love me? Could I live with their disappointment? One night, I broke. It was a slow shift, and Eli was the only one left at the bar. I was wiping down the counter, my hand shaking, when he reached out and stopped me. "Talk to me, Jake," he said, his voice soft but insistent. "What's going on in that head of yours?" I told him everything: the kiss, the confusion, the fear of losing my family, my faith, myself. I told him about the boy I'd been, the one who'd prayed every night to be good, to be right. I told him I didn't know if I could do this, even if I wanted to. Eli listened, his eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, he took my hand, his grip steady. "You don't have to have all the answers," he said, "but you deserve to be happy. You deserve to be you, whoever that is." His words broke something in me, a wall I'd built to keep myself safe. I cried, right there at the bar. And he held me, his arms strong and warm. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Eli and I started spending time outside the Haven coffee dates. Late-night walks. Moments stolen in the quiet corners of the city. He showed me parts of myself I'd never dared to explore. Parts that felt raw and real and terrifyingly alive. I was falling for him, hard and fast, and it scared me as much as it thrilled me. But the world wasn't as kind as Eli. One night, a group of guys came into the Haven, their voices loud and cruel. They weren't regulars, just drunk strangers looking for trouble. They hurled slurs, threw bottles, and before Tony could kick them out, one of them grabbed me, his breath hot and sour. "You one of them," he sneered, his grip bruising my arm. Eli was there in an instant, pulling the guy off me, his voice low and dangerous. "Back off," he said, and for a moment, I thought there'd be a fight. But Tony and the bouncer stepped in, and the guys were gone, leaving shattered glass and a heavy silence in their wake. Eli took me outside, his hands shaking as he checked me for injuries. "You okay?" he asked, his voice tight. I nodded, but I wasn't okay. The hatred in that guy's eyes, the venom in his words, it was everything I'd been taught to fear. Everything I'd been told I'd become if I let myself love Eli. I pulled away, my chest tight, and told him I needed space. For the next week, I avoided the Haven. I called in sick, ignored Eli's texts, hid in my apartment like a coward. But the silence was worse than the noise. Without Eli, without the bar, I felt like I was suffocating. I missed him, his laugh, his warmth, the way he made me feel like I could be enough. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I went back to the Haven, my heart in my throat. Eli was there, sitting at his usual spot, but his smile was gone, replaced by something guarded. I walked up to him, my voice trembling. "I'm sorry," I said. "I got scared, but I don't want to run anymore." He looked at me for a long moment, then stood and pulled me into his arms. "You don't have to do this alone," he whispered. "I'm here." That night, we went back to the park, to the same bench under the streetlight. We talked until dawn, about love, about fear, about the messy, beautiful work of becoming who you are. I told him I didn't have all the answers, that I might never, but I wanted to try for him, for me, for the person I was starting to become. The Haven became my home, in a way I never expected. I kept working there, pouring drinks, trading stories, building a life I hadn't known I could have. My parents didn't understand, and maybe they never would, but I was learning to live with that. I was learning to live. Period. Eli and I weren't perfect. We fought. We stumbled. We learned each other's sharp edges and soft places. But we were real, and that was enough. I didn't know who I was anymore, not entirely, but I'd never felt freer. The Haven had given me more than a paycheck. It had given me a chance to find myself, to find love, to find a life worth living.